At my funeral, I saw my son laughing. Not smiling politely. Not hiding his relief behind a solemn face. Laughing. The kind of laugh that comes from someone who believes a burden has finally disappeared. What he didn't know was that I was still alive, watching everything from less than half a mile away. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 72 years old, and 3 days ago, I discovered something that changed the way I saw my family forever. What happened next revealed truths that no mother should ever have to learn, but sometimes the people closest to us only show their real faces when they think we're gone. I was sitting in the back seat of a black SUV parked near St. Andrew's Cemetery, my hands folded quietly in my lap. A tablet rested beside me, streaming a live video feed from the memorial service that everyone believed was being held in my honor. White roses lined the chapel entrance. Friends and neighbors filled the seats. The minister stood at the front with a gentle expression. Everything looked exactly as a memorial service should look. Respectful. Dignified. Sad. At least on the surface. I watched familiar faces enter one by one. Some dabbed their eyes. Others bowed their heads. A few shared quiet memories. Then my son Ryan appeared on the screen. For a brief moment, I searched for grief in his face. I wanted to see some sign that losing his mother meant something to him. Instead, I saw impatience. He checked his watch 3 times within 5 minutes. He leaned toward his wife Lauren and whispered something. She smirked. My stomach tightened. Michael Bennett, my attorney and oldest friend, sat beside me in the SUV. Neither of us spoke. We simply watched. The service continued. People stood and shared kind words about me. They spoke about church bake sales, neighborhood gatherings, and the years I spent helping others. I listened quietly. Then came the moment I will never forget. The camera shifted toward Ryan. Someone approached him to offer condolences. He thanked them politely. The person walked away. Ryan turned toward Lauren. She said something I couldn't hear. And suddenly he laughed. A full laugh. Relaxed. Comfortable. Almost joyful. Lauren laughed too. My fingers tightened around the edge of the seat. The silence inside the SUV felt heavier than any words could describe. After everything I had done for him, after every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar saved to give him opportunities one never had, my son looked happier at my memorial service than he had looked during our last family dinner. I felt something inside me settle. Not break. Settle. Because in that moment, I stopped searching for excuses. I stopped telling myself I had misunderstood. I stopped pretending there was another explanation. Ryan wasn't grieving. He was celebrating. And before this day was over, I intended to find out exactly why. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting alone in the cardiology wing of Mercy General Hospital, watching rain slide down the window beside my bed. The doctor had assured me that my condition was stable. He told me I needed rest, less stress, and regular follow-up visits. At 72, none of that surprised me. What surprised me was what I heard an hour later. Ryan and Lauren thought I was asleep when they stepped into the hallway outside my room. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Years of raising children had taught me how to listen carefully. I heard Lauren first. She sounded impatient. "We cannot keep waiting forever," she said. "The house alone is worth nearly $800,000. There was a short silence. Then Ryan spoke. His voice was calm, almost detached. "Just give it time. Everything will be ours eventually." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. At first, I told myself I must have misunderstood. There had to be another explanation. Ryan was my son. I had spent decades believing there was goodness at the center of his heart. Yet something about the conversation stayed with me. Later that evening, after they left, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every word. The next morning, Michael Bennett visited me. He had been my attorney for more than 20 years, but more importantly, he had been a trusted friend since college. One look at my face and he knew something was wrong. I told him everything. Every word. Every detail. He listened quietly without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands and looked out the window for several seconds. Eleanor, he finally said, sometimes people reveal who they are only when they think they have nothing left to lose. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend my son. Instead, I found myself remembering small moments from the past 2 years. Ryan asking unusual questions about my investments. Lauren insisting she help organize my financial records. The way they always seemed more interested in my assets than my health. The memories came one after another like puzzle pieces finding their place. Michael leaned forward. If you truly want answers, stop asking questions. Watch what they do when they think nobody is watching. I sat quietly. Outside, the rain had stopped. A pale afternoon sun broke through the clouds. For the first time, I considered the possibility that my family had been hiding something from me for a very long time. Michael reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the bedside table. There may be a way to learn the truth, he said softly. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I looked at the folder, then back at him. Something told me my life was about to change forever. I did not open the folder immediately. Instead, I carried it home 2 days after leaving the hospital and placed it on my kitchen table. The house felt unusually quiet. Sunlight filtered through the curtains above the sink, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. For years I had loved that silence. It felt peaceful. Now it felt different. It felt like the pause before a storm. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down across from the folder. The label on the front was simple. My name. Nothing else. For nearly 10 minutes, I stared at it without touching it. Part of me wanted to throw it away and continue believing the version of my family I had carried in my heart for decades. But another part of me knew that ignoring the truth would not change it. Finally, I opened it. Inside were copies of financial records, property documents, and notes Michael had assembled over several months. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed dates. Transactions. Requests for information. Repeated inquiries about my estate. Most of them had come from Ryan. Several had been submitted through Lauren. My chest tightened as I turned each page. There was no theft. No crime. Nothing dramatic. What troubled me was something else entirely. The pattern. They were planning for a future that seemed to revolve less around my well-being and more around what I would leave behind. The next afternoon, Ryan called. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. He asked how I was feeling. He asked whether I was taking my medication. Then, almost casually, he asked whether I had updated my will recently. I answered carefully. Why do you ask? There was a brief pause. Just making sure everything is organized, he said. You know how important that stuff is. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my living room and stared at the family photographs on the mantel. Ryan at age 10 holding a baseball glove. Ryan at his high school graduation. Ryan dancing with me at his wedding. I searched those photographs for the boy I remembered. The boy who used to leave handwritten notes on my refrigerator telling me he loved me. The boy who once spent an entire summer saving allowance money to buy me a birthday gift. I wanted to believe he was still there somewhere. That evening, Michael visited again. He listened as I described everything I had found. When I finished, he nodded slowly. You still want to give them the benefit of the doubt, he said. Yes, I admitted. Because he is my son. Michael leaned back in his chair. Then let us remove all doubt. He explained the plan carefully. No tricks. No lies that would hurt anyone. Just an opportunity to observe what people did when they believed circumstances had changed. I listened in silence. The idea felt impossible. Yet the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed answers. Not assumptions. Not hopes. Answers. By the time Michael left that night, the decision had been made. For the first time in my life, I was going to stop protecting everyone else's feelings and start looking for the truth. The plan began 2 days later. Officially, My health had taken an unexpected turn. That was the story. Michael handled the details carefully, making certain everything remained respectful and believable. Only 3 people knew the truth. Michael, myself, and a retired nurse named Patricia who had agreed to help coordinate communications. Everyone else, including Ryan and Lauren, believed I had been moved to a private care facility with limited contact. The first 24 hours told me more than I had learned in the previous 2 years. Ryan called twice. Both conversations lasted less than 3 minutes. He sounded concerned, but distracted. Lauren never called me directly at all. Instead, she sent brief messages asking for updates. The questions themselves were ordinary. The timing was not. Less than a day after receiving news that my condition had supposedly worsened, Ryan contacted Michael to ask whether certain legal documents were organized. Michael shared the information with me later that evening. I sat quietly in the guest room of a small lakeside rental house nearly 60 miles from home. The room smelled faintly of pine wood and fresh coffee. Through the window, I could see calm water reflecting the late afternoon sun. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, I felt as though I were watching my life from a distance. Every update from Michael added another piece to a puzzle I no longer wanted to solve but could not ignore. On the second day, Ryan visited my house. Michael had arranged for temporary monitoring of the property for security reasons, and I was able to review the footage later. I watched my son walk through rooms that held decades of memories. The living room where he opened Christmas presents. The kitchen where we baked birthday cakes together. The backyard where he learned to ride a bicycle. Yet he did not seem nostalgic. He moved through each room with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. Lauren joined him an hour later carrying a notebook. Together they measured spaces, opened closets, and discussed furniture placement. At one point Lauren stood in my dining room and smiled. She pointed toward the large bay window and appeared to describe renovation ideas. Ryan nodded. They looked less like worried family members and more like future homeowners planning a project. That night I barely slept. I kept remembering small moments from years ago. Ryan calling me every Sunday after college. Ryan bringing flowers on Mother's Day. Ryan introducing me proudly to coworkers at company events. Where had that version of my son gone? Had he changed gradually while I refused to notice? Or had I simply mistaken love for loyalty? Early the next morning, Michael called. His voice sounded unusually serious. Ryan had contacted him again. This time the conversation was not about my health. It was about timing. Specifically, how long certain legal procedures might take under hypothetical circumstances. When Michael finished speaking, I stared at the lake outside my window for a very long time. The water remained perfectly still. For the first time since this began, I stopped hoping the evidence would prove me wrong. Something far more painful was becoming impossible to deny. Late that afternoon, something happened that I did not expect. My granddaughter Sophie called. She had no idea where I was. As far as she knew, I was receiving medical care somewhere far from home. Her voice sounded tired. Not distracted like Ryan's. Not calculated like Lauren's. Just tired. We talked about ordinary things at first. School. Her part-time job at the local bookstore. The weather. Then her voice became quieter. Grandma, I miss you. For simple words. Yet they hit me harder than anything I had heard all week. I stared out across the lake and felt my throat tighten. Sophie was 17 now, nearly an adult. But in that moment I remembered the little girl who used to sit beside me while I baked chocolate chip cookies. The little girl who insisted every doll in her room needed its own birthday party. Some things had changed. Her kindness had not. We spoke for nearly 40 minutes. Not once did she ask about money. Not once did she mention the house. She only wanted to know whether I was comfortable, and whether I needed anything. After we ended the call, I sat quietly at the kitchen table. For the first time in days, I felt something other than disappointment. I felt relief. Maybe not everyone had forgotten what family was supposed to mean. The following morning, Michael arrived with fresh updates. He carried another folder, though this one was much thinner. He set it on the table and removed several pages. "You should see this," he said. They were copies of emails. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. But they revealed priorities. Lauren had been researching local real estate values. Ryan had requested information about property transfers and estate processing timelines. What struck me was not the content itself. It was the timing. Every inquiry had been made while they supposedly believed I was seriously ill. I looked down at the pages and felt strangely calm. Weeks earlier, those documents would have devastated me. Now they simply confirmed what I was already beginning to understand. Michael poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from me. "There is one more thing," he said. He handed me a photograph printed from security footage at my house. Ryan and Lauren were standing in my study. Lauren was pointing toward the built-in cabinets where I kept family records and personal papers. Both of them appeared focused. Intentional. Like people searching for something specific. I recognized the expression immediately. It was not concern. It was expectation. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the trees, I found myself looking through an old photo album. Page after page documented a life spent loving my family. Birthday parties. Vacations. Graduations. Holidays around a crowded dinner table. I realized something painful then. Love can create beautiful memories, but it can also blind us to uncomfortable truths. For years I had explained away every warning sign because I wanted to believe the best about the people I loved. Now the excuses were running out. And the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The next morning began with the discovery that Michael had deliberately waited to share until he was certain of the facts. He arrived shortly after 8 o'clock carrying a weathered leather briefcase that I had seen hundreds of times over the years. We sat on the small porch overlooking the lake. The air was cool, and a thin layer of mist still hovered above the water. Michael removed several documents and placed them on the table between us. "These are older than the records I showed you before," he said quietly. I adjusted my reading glasses and began turning the pages. At first, the dates meant nothing to me. Then I noticed they stretched back nearly 4 years. 4 years. Long before my recent health concerns. Long before anyone could claim they were simply preparing for an uncertain future. The documents revealed a pattern of requests for information about trusts, beneficiary structures, retirement accounts, and property ownership. Most had been submitted indirectly through financial advisors or consultants. Yet the names connected to those inquiries appeared again and again. Ryan. Lauren. I looked up slowly. "They have been planning this for years?" Michael did not answer immediately. He simply nodded. The silence that followed felt heavier than any explanation. I remembered family dinners where Lauren had offered to help organize paperwork. I remembered Ryan insisting he wanted to make things easier for me. At the time, those gestures had seemed thoughtful. Looking back now, they felt different. Not cruel. Calculated. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing old memories with new eyes. Certain conversations suddenly made sense. Certain questions no longer seemed innocent. There had always been a reason they wanted access to information. There had always been a purpose behind the concern. Later that evening, Michael received another update. Ryan had scheduled a meeting regarding future property valuations. The timing was impossible to ignore. He still believed I was in serious condition. Yet instead of focusing on family, he seemed increasingly focused on assets. I sat quietly by the window after Michael left. The sun had begun to set, painting the lake in shades of gold and orange. In another life, I would have called Ryan just to hear his voice. I would have searched for excuses on his behalf. I would have convinced myself that I was being unfair. But the evidence had become too consistent. Too complete. Around 7 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Sophie. She sounded nervous. After a few minutes of conversation, she finally admitted why she had called. "Dad and Lauren have been talking about the house a lot lately," she said. More than usual. I listened carefully. Sophie explained that they had been discussing renovations, moving schedules, and future plans as though major decisions had already been made. She sounded confused. I felt something else. Not anger. Clarity. The final pieces were beginning to fall into place. As darkness settled over the lake, I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. For years, I had feared discovering the truth. Now I feared something different. I feared that the truth was even worse than I had imagined. 2 days later, the next stage of the plan began. According to the story everyone believed, my condition had taken a final turn for the worse. Messages were sent. Calls were made. Arrangements were discussed. Michael handled everything with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout the entire process. From the lakeside house, I watched events unfold through updates, recordings, and reports. What surprised me was not the sadness people expressed. Many friends and neighbors were genuinely heartbroken. What surprised me was how quickly Ryan and Lauren shifted their attention toward what would come next. Less than 24 hours after receiving the news, Ryan contacted Michael requesting information about estate procedures. He tried to sound responsible, practical, organized. Yet even Michael noticed how little time passed before financial matters entered the conversation. The following afternoon, Ryan and Lauren met with him in person. The meeting had been scheduled under the pretense of discussing future responsibilities. Michael recorded detailed notes afterward and shared them with me that evening. As I read through them, my hands remained steady. Ryan asked about property transfers. Lauren asked about timelines. Ryan asked about account access. Lauren asked whether certain assets would require probate review. Not once during the entire meeting did either of them ask whether there were personal letters, family keepsakes, or charitable wishes that mattered to me. The focus remained fixed on numbers and ownership. I sat by the window overlooking the dark lake and reread the notes 3 times. Each sentence confirmed what I had spent years refusing to see. The next morning brought another revelation. Sophie had been present at part of the meeting. She later called Michael privately. Her voice trembled as she described what she witnessed. She said the conversation made her uncomfortable. She said everyone seemed to be planning a future that moved forward unusually fast. Most painful of all, she admitted she felt as though nobody was talking about me as a person anymore. Only as an estate. When Michael repeated her words, I closed my eyes. That single observation from a 17-year-old girl carried more honesty than everything else I had heard combined. People reveal themselves in strange ways. Sometimes through grand actions. Sometimes through small conversations they believe nobody will remember. As evening approached, Michael arrived with one final folder. Inside were preparations for a formal reading that would occur after the memorial service. Every detail had been carefully arranged. Every document reviewed. Every legal requirement satisfied. The plan was nearly complete. For the first time since this began, I felt neither fear nor disappointment. I felt certainty. The uncertainty that had haunted me for years was gone. Soon there would be no assumptions left. No misunderstandings. No excuses. Everyone would have an opportunity to reveal exactly who they were. And when that moment arrived, the truth would speak far louder than I ever could. The morning of the memorial service arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air. From the back seat of the SUV parked near the cemetery, I watched everything unfold through the live video feed Michael had arranged. White roses lined the walkway. Guests filled the chapel. Familiar faces moved through the crowd, offering condolences and sharing quiet conversations. Many of them had known me for decades. Some had watched Ryan grow up. Others had attended birthday parties, anniversaries, and holiday dinners in my home. Seeing them there touched me more than I expected. Their grief was real. Their kindness was real. That made everything else even harder to watch. Ryan stood near the front greeting visitors. Lauren remained close beside him. Both wore expressions that appeared appropriate from a distance. Yet after hours of observation, I had learned to recognize the difference between sorrow and performance. During a break between speeches, the camera captured them speaking privately near the side entrance. Their posture relaxed immediately. Lauren smiled. Ryan nodded. Then they both laughed softly about something. It was the same look I had seen in the recordings from my house. The same confidence. The same expectation. A little later, several guests began sharing memories. One woman spoke about a church fundraiser we organized 20 years earlier. Another described how I delivered meals after her husband became ill. Listening to those stories reminded me that a life is measured by far more than property and accounts. It is measured by the people we help and the kindness we leave behind. Then Sophie approached the podium. The room became silent. She unfolded a handwritten letter and took a deep breath. Her voice trembled at first, but she continued. She spoke about baking cookies in my kitchen. About learning to ride a bicycle while I ran beside her down the sidewalk. About the advice I gave whenever life felt overwhelming. Several people wiped tears from their eyes. So did I. Not because of sadness. Because her words were sincere. She was the only person that day who spoke about me as though I still mattered beyond what I owned. When she finished, the room remained quiet for several seconds before applause filled the chapel. I noticed Ryan glance at his watch again. Lauren leaned over and whispered something into his ear. He nodded. That small gesture told me everything. Their minds were already moving toward what came next. The memorial service eventually ended, and guests slowly began leaving the cemetery. Cars pulled away one by one. Flowers remained beside the chapel entrance. The camera feed continued as Ryan, Lauren, Sophie, and several relatives made their way toward the conference room where the formal reading would soon take place. Michael sat beside me in the SUV and closed his folder. "This is it," he said quietly. I looked through the windshield toward the distant building and felt an unexpected sense of calm settle over me. For days I had watched people reveal themselves. Now it was finally time for them to see the truth. The conference room was already full when Michael entered. Ryan sat near the head of the table. Lauren occupied the chair beside him. Several relatives had gathered quietly around the room. Sophie sat alone near the window, her hands folded in her lap. The atmosphere felt different from the memorial service. Less emotional. More expectant. Michael placed a thick folder on the table and greeted everyone politely before taking his seat. Ryan appeared confident. Lauren looked composed. Neither of them knew that I was standing just outside the building. Michael began with routine legal remarks. He reviewed documents, explained procedures, and thanked everyone for their patience. Ryan listened carefully. Lauren occasionally exchanged glances with him. As the meeting continued, the questions became more specific. Ryan asked about property ownership. Lauren asked about account distributions. Michael answered calmly, never rushing, never revealing more than necessary. Then he opened a separate folder. The room grew quiet. He explained that before any assets could be distributed, certain personal instructions needed to be addressed. Ryan shifted slightly in his chair. Lauren crossed her arms. Michael continued reading. The first instruction established a scholarship fund for local students pursuing nursing careers. The second created annual donations for several community organizations that had been important to me throughout my life. The third reserved educational funding for Sophie. I was told later that Ryan's expression changed with each announcement. Not dramatically. Just enough. The confidence slowly faded. Questions began appearing where certainty had once existed. Then Michael paused. He closed the folder and looked toward the door. Every person in the room followed his gaze. The door opened. I stepped inside. For a moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence seemed to stretch across the entire room. Ryan stared at me. Lauren's face lost all color. Several relatives looked completely stunned. Sophie covered her mouth with both hands. The first sound came from her. "Grandma?" she whispered. I smiled gently and walked into the room. My legs felt steady. My heart felt lighter than it had in years. Not because I enjoyed surprising anyone, Not because I wanted revenge. Because the waiting was finally over. The truth no longer needed to hide behind assumptions. Michael invited me to sit beside him. Then he presented the final documents. They included records of years of inquiries, requests, and preparations related to my finances and property. Nothing criminal. Nothing sensational. Just a clear pattern that revealed priorities. Nobody argued with the facts. Nobody denied the dates. Nobody challenged the documents. The evidence spoke for itself. I looked at Ryan and saw something I had not seen in a very long time. Not confidence. Not entitlement. Regret. Real regret. Perhaps it came too late. Perhaps it was genuine. I will never know. What I do know is that the decisions had already been made. The majority of my estate would support the scholarship fund, community programs, and Sophie's future. The house would eventually be sold according to the instructions Michael outlined. When the meeting ended, I stood and thanked everyone for coming. Then I walked toward the door. Years earlier, I might have spent hours explaining myself, defending my choices, seeking approval. This time I did not. I had finally learned something important. The greatest peace does not come from changing other people. It comes from seeing them clearly. And on that day, after everything that happened, I finally did.